Imagine the holiest place humanity ever built. Now imagine that place drenched in blood every day, with piles of carcasses being dismembered, intestines being washed in giant basins, and black smoke covering the sky. Solomon's temple was beauty and carnage occupying the same space, and there were specific rules for every drop of blood spilled. The bronze altar where animals were burned measured 9 meters long by 9 meters wide and 4.5 meters high. It wasn't a decorative table. It was an industrial platform designed to process volume, and the volume was absurd. When Solomon inaugurated the temple, according to Kings chapter 8, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep were sacrificed in a single ceremony. 142,000 animals killed in a matter of days. The common altar couldn't handle it. Solomon needed to consecrate the entire courtyard as a temporary sacrifice area. Bonfires burning in all directions, blood flowing through improvised channels, the smell of burning fat permeating everyone's clothes nearby. But that was an exceptional event. What happened day to day was different, structured, planned, mechanical. 3:30 in the morning, total darkness. A priest, chosen by Lot the night before, awoke before everyone else. He washed his hands and feet in a giant bronze basin called the Sea of Casting, which had capacity for 44,000 liters of water. He wore white linen clothes without any sewing defect. Each piece had been previously inspected. Loose threads were cut. Tiny stains disqualified the entire garment. Because presenting yourself before God with imperfect vestments was intolerable disrespect. Barefoot, he walked to the altar where the previous night's coals still burned. His feet touched cold stones. The morning air cut his skin, but the work couldn't wait for the sun to rise. His task was to clean the accumulated ashes, separate those that still served from those that were dead, and rekindle the sacred fire that could never be extinguished. Leviticus 6 is explicit. The fire on the altar shall burn on it. It shall not be put out. Extinguishing the fire meant grave ritual failure, so he worked carefully, removing ashes with a bronze shovel, feeding the coals with dry acacia wood, preparing the altar for the first sacrifice of the day. The ashes weren't discarded just anywhere. Leviticus 1 instructs that they be carried outside the camp to a clean place. In Solomon's temple, this meant carrying them to a specific deposit in the valley below. Kilos of ashes every day, physical residue of prayers rising to heaven. Meanwhile, other priests brought the animals to the courtyard. Lambs for the morning continual sacrifice, always 2 per day, one in the morning, another at the end of the afternoon. Exodus 29 details the instructions. They were 1-year-old lambs without defect, males, no old, sick or injured animals. God demanded the best. The animals came from pens maintained near the temple. Entire flocks were raised specifically for sacrifice. Professional shepherds cared for them. They inspected daily. Any sign of disease and the animal was separated. It no longer served for the altar. The lamb was brought to the north side of the altar. Specific position. It wasn't random. Leviticus 1 verse 11 fixes the location. And he shall kill it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord. Always the north side, never south, east or west. The geography of the sacred mattered. The priest held the animal's head firmly. The lamb smelled the blood of previous sacrifices. It tried to back away, but experienced hands kept it in place. The sharpened bronze knife was positioned against the neck, and the cut came quickly. A deep and precise movement. Carotid arteries and jugular veins sectioned simultaneously. The trachea cut right after. The blood gushed in surprising quantity. An adult lamb has about 3.5 to 4 liters of blood in its body, and that blood came out under pressure, rhythmic spurts accompanying the last heartbeats. The animal thrashed reflexively, legs kicking the air, body trembling. But consciousness had already gone. The brain, deprived of oxygen, shut down in seconds, and that blood needed to be collected. Another priest held a polished silver basin, collected the blood while the animal died. The basin warmed in his hand. The dark red liquid steamed slightly in the cold morning air. He carried it to the altar running. Because the blood couldn't coagulate before being sprinkled, Leviticus 1 describes the process. The priests shall sprinkle the blood round about upon the altar. It wasn't throwing it carelessly, it was technical movement, controlled throw that spread the blood in a wide arc against the sides of the altar. The silver gleamed for an instant before being covered by red, the metallic smell of blood, mixed with the woody smell of the coals. Then came the dirty work, skinning the animal. The priest made strategic incisions. He started with the hind legs, cut around the joints, introduced the knife between skin and flesh, pulled hard. The skin released with characteristic sound, fibers breaking, white fat adhered, being separated by force. Washing the carcass came next, removing intestines and internal organs, opening the stomach, washing everything with running water from the bronze basins. Because Leviticus required that intestines and legs be washed with water. No stomach contents, no feces, no dirt could go up to the altar. The smell in this phase was particularly strong. Intestinal contents of herbivores have characteristic odor, mixture of semi-digested vegetables fermenting in the heat. The priests worked breathing through their mouths, but disgust didn't exempt them from the task. The animal was then dismembered, head separated from the spinal column, legs cut at knee and hip joints, chest opened with precise cut along the sternum, viscera carefully removed, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys. Each organ had certain destiny. The fat covering the intestines, the 2 kidneys with the fat that was on them, and the lobe of the liver were burned. First, Leviticus 3 lists each part. And it wasn't suggestion, it was command. That specific fat belonged to God. It rose in dense and dark smoke. The priest carried the pieces up the ramp, 4.5 meters of incline. Steps were forbidden, so it was continuous ramp with about 20 degrees of incline. Going up carrying weight required effort, leg muscles burned, breathing accelerated. At the top, the heat was brutal. The coals radiated temperature that easily reached 200 degrees Celsius on the altar surface. Positioning the meat without getting burned required practice, quick and precise movements. Release and retreat. Let it fall in the right place. The fat melted instantly, dripped between the coals, fed the fire. The flames rose suddenly, blue at the base, yellow in the middle, red at the tip. The crackling was constant, and the smoke rose in thick and black column. The smell was strong, mixture of burned fat with roasted meat. Some found it pleasant, barbecue aroma, but after hours exposed, the smell stuck in the nostrils, impregnated the clothes, stayed in the hair, took days to completely come out, and that was just the morning sacrifice, a single lamb. The Tamid, the continual holocaust that kept the connection between Israel and God active. Interrupting that sequence was unthinkable. During the day, people brought personal offerings, atonement for sins, thanksgiving, fulfilled vows. Each type of offering had different rules, and the priests needed to know all of them by heart. Sin offering, the chatat, required specific blood. If the sin were of a priest or of the entire congregation, the blood was carried inside the holy place, sprinkled 7 times before the veil that separated the holy from the Holy of Holies. Leviticus 4 describes each movement. Then the blood was placed on the horns of the incense altar, and the rest was poured at the base of the Holocaust altar. If the sin were of a leader or common individual, the process changed. The blood didn't enter the holy place. It stayed only in the courtyard. It was applied to the horns of the Holocaust altar with the finger, and then the rest poured at the base. The meat of the sin-offering animal had specific destiny. The priests ate part of it, but only in holy place. In the courtyard of the tabernacle or temple, they never took it home. never shared it with family members outside the priestly circle. It was food too sacred for common consumption. Peace offering, the shelamim, allowed the offerer to eat part of the meat. It was communion sacrifice. The blood was sprinkled against the altar, the fat was burned, but the breast and right thigh went to the priests, and the rest returned to whoever offered. This created interesting social dynamic. Making peace offering meant having fresh meat for the family. In society where meat was luxury, not daily food, that mattered. Poor families saved for months to have enough money for a lamb. And when they finally offered, there was celebration, roasted meat for everyone. Celebration, Holocaust, the Ola, meant the entire animal would be burned. Nothing remained, not for the priests, not for the offerer. Everything rose in smoke. It was offering of total surrender, and for that very reason, the most expensive. Because the offerer recovered nothing, only the certainty that he had given the best to God. Cereal offering, the mincha, didn't involve blood, only wheat flour mixed with oil and incense. A portion was burned on the altar. The rest went to the priests. It was basic food, bread, daily sustenance, and there were rigid rules. Leviticus 2 prohibits leaven and honey. Only flour, oil, incense, and salt. The animals varied according to the person's financial situation. Rich people brought oxen. An adult ox weighs between 600 and 800 kilos. Killing, skinning, and dismembering an animal that size gave brutal work. Took time. Required several men working together coordinately. The slaughter began the same way. Throat cutting. Blood collected and sprinkled. But skinning an ox was a completely different operation from skinning a lamb. The skin was thick, heavy, resistant, making the correct incisions required. Strength. Separating skin from meat required even more. 3 or 4 priests worked simultaneously, one on each leg, pulling, cutting where necessary. The skin came off in one piece if done correctly, and those skins had value. Leviticus 7 establishes that the skin of holocausts belonged to the officiating priest. It was additional income. Ox leather was worth money. Could be sold to manufacturers of sandals, belts, wineskins. Dismembering the animal took even more time. Different knives were needed, some to cut meat, others to separate joints, and it was physically demanding work. Cutting through large muscles, separating bones at joints, carrying heavy quarters to the altar. A hind quarter of ox easily weighed 80 to 100 kilos. Going up the ramp carrying that was endurance test. The priests took turns. One went up with the load, rested, another went up. Constant teamwork. Middle class brought lambs or goats, smaller animals, easier to handle, faster to process, but there was still blood, there was still fire, there was still smoke. An adult lamb weighed between 25 and 40 kilos, manageable size for one man. The entire process, from slaughter to starting to burn, took about 20 to 30 minutes. With experienced priests, poor people brought doves or pigeons. Leviticus 5 allowed this when the person had no means to buy a lamb, and the process changed completely. There was no formal throat cutting. The priest held the bird firmly, twisted the neck with quick and precise movement, without completely tearing off the head. It hung by a piece of skin and flesh. Then he squeezed the blood on the side of the altar, let it drip directly against the stone wall, opened the body with his fingers, removed the crop with the feathers attached to it, threw it in, the ash pile on the east side of the altar where dirt accumulated, and burned the rest. It was quick, less than 5 minutes from start to finish, less dramatic than sacrificing an ox. But the principle was the same, blood shedding as payment for sin. And here's the reality many people don't perceive. For the poor, bringing 2 doves represented real financial sacrifice. They weren't free animals. They needed to be bought. And people living on the edge of poverty felt the weight. But it was the only way to present themselves to God. So they saved, brought, offered the little they had. There were special days where the scale exploded completely. Passover was the worst, or the best, depending on perspective. Each Israelite family needed to bring a lamb. On the 10th day of the first month, the lamb was separated, taken home, observed for 4 days, verified to ensure it had no defects, and on the 14th day, at evening, it was taken to the temple for sacrifice. Josephus, first-century Jewish historian who lived during the Second Temple period, estimated that in his time, more than 255,600 lambs were sacrificed in a single Passover day. He calculated based on groups of at least 10 people per lamb and estimated population in Jerusalem during the feast. Modern numbers suggest something between 100,000 and 150,000. Even being half what Josephus said, it's still gigantic operation. Put it in perspective. 100,000 lambs in one day, from mid-afternoon until night. Let's say 6 hours of intensive work. That gives 16,600 lambs per hour, 277 per minute, 4.5 per second. How do you process that quantity without modern technology? Shifts of priests, working simultaneously. 2 Chronicles 35 mentions that Levites helped in the slaughter because priests couldn't handle it alone. The operation became brutal production line. One group held the animals, another cut throats, another collected blood in basins, another ran to the altar to sprinkle, another dismembered, another carried to the bonfires, another burned. Absolute chain work without stopping. The priest's courtyard became completely covered in blood. The stone floor, normally light, became dark red, slippery, dangerous. Priests needed to be careful not to fall while carrying sharp knives or basins full of hot blood. The smell was indescribable. Fresh blood has characteristic metallic smell. Multiply that by thousands of animals being killed in the same confined space. Add fat burning in dozens of simultaneous bonfires, meat carbonizing, intestines being opened, stomach contents being washed, wood smoke mixed with animal fat smoke. The air became heavy, dense, difficult to breathe. The smoke burned the eyes, made them tear. The throat became dry and harsh, and there was no escape. The work needed to continue until the last lamb was processed. And the drainage channels worked at absolute limit. The temple had complex and ingenious hydraulic system. Channels carved directly into stone, conducted blood out of the courtyard, passed under the walls, emptied into the Kidron Valley below the Temple Mount. During normal days, the system worked perfectly. Blood flowed slowly, was diluted by wash water, reached the valley already mixed. But during Passover, it was red deluge. The channels overflowed. Blood flowed through the streets around the temple, formed puddles in terrain depressions. The Kidron Valley became stained red. The stream that normally ran clear transformed into river of blood for hours. Observers from afar saw black smoke rising from the temple area in thick column that reached hundreds of meters. In height, the smell traveled kilometers with the wind. All Jerusalem knew when it was Passover, not just by the date, but by the smell of blood and fire that covered the entire city. But there was rigid organization behind what seemed total chaos. The priests were divided into 24 shifts. 1 Chronicles 24 lists the division made by David and confirmed by Solomon. Each shift served 1 week at a time, twice per year. During their week, that group was responsible for all sacrifices. They coordinated everything, distributed tasks, ensured rules were followed to the letter. Within each shift, there was clear and respected hierarchy. The high priest supervised general operations, but rarely did heavy manual work. Common priests, direct descendants of Aaron, killed animals, collected blood, burned specified parts. Levites, from the tribe of Levi but not direct descendants of Aaron, assisted in transporting animals, cleaning facilities, and general maintenance of the complex. And there were specific tasks that required lottery because everyone wanted to do them. Burning incense on the golden altar inside the holy place was maximum honor. It happened twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and it meant entering where only priests could go, standing in the holy place, feeling God's presence more intensely than any other regular activity. Luke 1 records that Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, was chosen by lot to burn incense. The text says there was a multitude of people praying outside at the hour of incense. It was event. People knew the time, stopped their activities, came to the temple, and prayed while the smoke rose. It was a rare event in a priest's life. There were thousands of priests, and only 2 opportunities per day. A man could spend decades serving without ever being chosen. Some died without ever having burned incense. So when the name was called, it was a moment of trembling and joy mixed. But the part nobody wanted was dealing with ashes in the middle of the night, cleaning the altar at 3:30 in the morning, carrying hot ashes in bronze shovels to the deposit outside the courtyard. Dirty work, dangerous. The coals burned even after hours cooling. The soot stuck to skin wet with sweat, entered the nostrils. The smell permeated the body, stayed in the pores, took days to completely come out even with repeated baths. And there was constant psychological pressure weighing on each movement, because making mistake during ritual could be fatal in sudden and terrible way. Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, offered strange fire before the Lord. Leviticus 10 records. They died instantly, consumed by fire that came out from before the Lord, burned alive inside the tabernacle. What was the exact error? The text doesn't explain completely. Later, Jewish commentators suggested various possibilities. They used fire from wrong source instead of the perpetual fire of the altar, or offered incense at unauthorized moment, or entered drunk, or didn't wash their hands adequately, or used incense with wrong composition, but the consequence was absolutely clear: immediate death. And God's order to Aaron was direct and harsh. Don't mourn. Don't make public mourning. Your sons died because they disobeyed me. Accept. So priests worked with constant reverent fear. They followed each rule to the letter, checked twice each detail, checked 3 times if necessary, because they knew deeply that the God for whom they worked didn't tolerate negligence, didn't accept excuses, didn't give second chance when holiness was deliberately violated. The priestly garments helped constantly remember that. Pure white linen, no mixture of fabrics. Exodus 28 describes in detail the high priest's vestments: breastplate with 12 precious stones embedded representing the 12 tribes, ephod of fine linen embroidered with gold threads, blue robe with pure gold bells and fabric pomegranates at the hem, linen turban with a pure gold plate where was engraved, "Holiness to the Lord." The bells had essential practical function. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the bells rang with each movement. The sound passed through the veil, reached the holy place. The other priests heard, the people outside heard, and everyone knew. He's still alive. God didn't kill him. If the sound stopped abruptly, it meant something had gone terribly wrong, and nobody could enter to help. The Holy of Holies was forbidden. Only the high priest, only once a year. If he died in there, the body would remain until the next Yom Kippur, when the next high priest entered. Later Jewish traditions mention that they tied a rope to the high priest's ankle. If he died, they'd pull the body. But there's no biblical evidence of this, and scholars question whether they really did it, because pulling a dead body from the Holy of Holies would violate the holiness of the place in grave way. But that happened only once a year. The rest of the time, 364 days, the work was continuous processing of animals. Blood, meat, bones, skin, repeated hundreds of times per day, thousands of times per week. tens of thousands of times per year. Decades of identical work, generations of priests doing exactly what their fathers and grandfathers did. And the temple's architecture perfectly reflected that function. The priest's courtyard, where sacrifices happened, measured approximately 55 meters long by 22 meters wide. 1,210 square meters. Enough space for movement of multiple priests working simultaneously, but not wasted. Each square meter had defined purpose. The smaller bronze basins, 10 in total, served exclusively to wash the parts of sacrifices. 5 remained on the right side of the temple, 5 on the left side. According to Chronicles 4, specifies that each had capacity for 880 liters, almost 900 liters per basin, almost 9,000 liters in total. Constant running water maintained by aqueduct system because it needed to be always available, clean and fresh. The giant sea of casting, the enormous circular basin sustained by 12 oxen of cast bronze, remained strategically positioned on the southeast side. It had capacity for 44,000 liters. It was strategic reserve. It guaranteed water would never run out, even on days of extreme movement like Passover or Day of Atonement. And the altar had a ramp instead of steps for specific reason. Exodus 20 is explicit. Neither shalt thou go up by steps unto mine altar, that thy nakedness be not discovered thereon. The priests wore long tunics, but climbing steps risked exposing the lower part of the body. The continuous ramp kept priests covered while they went up and down, carrying parts of sacrifices. It preserved dignity during physically demanding and constant work. Because the work was brutally demanding, carrying ox quarters weighing 80 to 100 kilos, going up 4.5 meters of inclined ramp, positioning over burning coals without letting fall, turning pieces to burn uniformly on all surfaces, adding firewood as needed to maintain constant temperature, removing already carbonized pieces to give space to new ones, and all this under Jerusalem's scorching sun. Summer in the Middle East, 40 degrees Celsius in the shade easily, 45 in the hottest hours. At brutal radiant heat from bonfires burning at 200 degrees, wear linen clothes that, although light, don't breathe as well as modern fabrics. Work shifts of 8 to 12 hours straight without long breaks. Physical fatigue was real and accumulated. Dehydration, constant and dangerous. Risk of burns, permanent. Coals jumped, melted fat splattered, pieces of meat fell from tools, and there was no workplace safety system, no protective equipment, no compensation for accidents. Injuries happened regularly. Knives slipped cutting hands, coals fell burning bare feet, frightened animals kicked unwary priests, inhaled smoke caused chronic respiratory problems. And nobody was dismissed from service because of that, unless the injury made him ritually impure or completely unable to work. Later rabbinic records written after the temple's destruction, but based on preserved oral traditions, mentioned that priests developed enormous and hardened calluses on their hands from holding knives so much. Back and knee problems were common because of repeatedly carried weight. Respiratory problems arose from constant inhalation of dense smoke, and there was even mention that some became partially deaf from the constant noise, because there was noise, much noise, animals bleating and lowing, orders being shouted from one side to another, fire crackling, fat popping on the coals, knives being sharpened on stones, shovels scraping ashes, water gushing from basins, hundreds of people moving simultaneously, and over all that, voices singing. Because while sacrifices happened, Levites sang psalms. 2 Chronicles 29 describes, the singers sang, and the trumpets sounded throughout all the burnt offering. Constant music, sonic worship while blood flowed and fire consumed. It was intense sensory contrast. Beauty and brutality, worship and slaughter, holiness and blood. Everything happening simultaneously in the same sacred space. But the system continued functioning. every day, without holidays, without breaks, for almost 1,000 years from Solomon until the final destruction, until the very purpose of the system completely changed. Solomon's temple functioned as religious center for almost 400 years before being destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 before Christ. 70 years later, it was rebuilt, and the Second Temple, renewed and massively expanded by Herod decades before Christ, continued the sacrifice system until the year 70 after Christ. Archaeologists working in Jerusalem found impressive physical remains. Giant bonfires with layers of compacted ashes from decades, drainage channels with chemical deposits indicating blood, bronze tools used by priests, broken basins, pottery fragments where they stored water. Everything indicates that biblical descriptions about the scale and intensity of sacrifices weren't literary or religious exaggeration. It was literally an industrial animal processing operation dedicated to God. Today, 3 Abrahamic religions consider that specific mount in Jerusalem as sacred: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But no animal is sacrificed there anymore. The system that completely dominated Israel's religious life for more than 1,000 years exists only in ancient texts, preserved traditions, and in ruins that can still be visited and touched in Jerusalem. One day, that place was drenched in blood. Smoke rose constantly. The smell of burning meat covered the city. Thousands of people worked processing animals from before dawn until after sunset. The next day, empty, silent, cold. And it never again became what it was for 1,000 years.